Thank you. The next item of business is debate on motion 1885 in the name of Fiona Hislop on the impact of the UK Government's family migration policy in Scotland. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? I call on Fiona Hislop to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, 9 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to focus on an issue which affects families and communities across Scotland. Many members in the Chamber will have had experience of intervening on behalf of constituents who face the prospect of family separation because of the UK Government's family immigration rules. The UK Government's approach to migration is simply not working for Scotland. We face different challenges in relation to population, demography and rurality. Our population is ageing, while our working age population and the proportion of children and young people are falling. All of our population growth is projected to come from inward migration. Last year, 14 of our local authorities experienced depopulation. Scotland needs people to come here, to bring their families and to build their lives here. There is a practical case for change, but there is also a moral case. This goes to the heart of what type of country we want to be. Are we a welcoming country, a country that prioritises the needs of children and families, or a country that forces people to choose between living in their home country or with their loved ones? It has, of course, been a busy few days for immigration. We've had a whole series of changes to immigration rules, 102 pages, which tells us something about the complexity of the immigration system. The UK Government has announced proposals for a 3-year European temporary leave to remain visa route and the welcome, if long overdue, announcement on the reinstatement of a post-study work visa. Presiding Officer, the reinstatement of a post-study work visa is testament to the hard work over many years of elected members, universities, employers and partners across Scotland. The announcement last week shows that when there is a clear evidence base for change, when we work together and with partners, we can make a difference. We can secure change in the system, and we need that change. Let me be clear, the evidence base for a change to family migration policy is there. Since 2012, the UK Government has steadily eroded the family reunification rights of UK citizens, introducing a minimum income threshold of £18,600, which rises if there are children, extending the period before which migrant family members can apply for settlement, and restricting the rights of adult dependent relatives to join their families in the UK, to a point where it is almost impossible to meet the requirements. Since implementation of these new rules, there has been a 41% reduction in the number of visas granted to family members from the peak in 2007. These figures represent thousands of families across the UK forced into separation, told by the UK Government to rely on emails, text messages and video calls to maintain their family life. In 2015, the Migration Observatory published data showing that 58% of people in Scotland did not meet the financial thresholds to bring a non-UK spouse and 2 children into the UK through the family migration route. This is a policy that has a greater negative impact on women, on young people and on people living outside London. The Children's Commissioner for England has published research estimating that almost 15,000 children are growing up in so-called Skype families because their parents cannot live together in the UK because of family migration rules. As the report states, thousands of children are being forced to grow up without a parent solely as a result of these rules. Presiding Officer, the UK's families migration policies are the direct legacy of a hostile environment policy, underpinned by an irrational and unachievable target to reduce net migration to the tens of thousands. Under this policy, British and settled families in the UK have seen their rights to be joined by family members severely restricted, forcing many to choose between staying in the UK and being with their family. The exception to this has been free movement. People have moved across Europe, have fallen in love, had children and established their lives, safe in the knowledge that wherever they chose to put down roots, Their free movement rights would allow them to return home with their families. But the UK government's determination to end free movement threatens this security. In a no-deal scenario, once free movement ends, UK families in the rest of Europe will be subject to the full weight of the UK government's punitive approach to family migration should they wish to return to the UK. Presiding Officer, that is why we are calling for the UK government to take a different approach to family migration, to improve the rights of people in Scotland, to bring close family into the country with them, because this kind of migration is crucial to Scotland's future. I've talked about evidence, but there are real people behind each of these statistics, real families and real children. Take the case of Anthony Duffy and Juliana Colliani, newlyweds from Edinburgh, who were told by the Home Office that they didn't earn enough to meet the minimum income threshold. They have been forced to live apart for almost their entire marriage. This simply cannot be right. It is also not right that children who were born in Scotland, who have spent their formative years here, can be ordered to leave so easily. Denzel Dark, who spent his formative years in the UK, was a Queen's Baton relay holder for the Glasgow Commonwealth Games and had been studying at Stirling University to become a nurse. Despite this, his application to stay was refused and he was told to leave the UK. Following high-profile media and ministerial interventions, he was rightly granted permanent residence. The Habib Marans, an elderly couple from Edinburgh, have been in the UK on and off for 40 years with their 4 British children and 11 grandchildren. They acted as co-parents to one of their grandchildren, allowing the boy's mother to continue her work as an NHS nurse. Despite this, they were ordered to leave the UK because they were not considered to be close family members. Happily, following a campaign by the community, the Habib Marans were eventually allowed to stay. I welcome the fact that Home Office ministers changed their minds on some cases. Yet in each of these cases, the families, the communities, often supported by elected members, have had to fight every step of the way to change that decision. While some families have received good news, many other families face being torn apart. What we need is a broader discussion about whether the family migration rules are fit for purpose. That is why the Scottish Government will shortly commission the Expert Advisory Group on Migration and Population to look more closely at the impact current family migration rules have on families in Scotland, with particular regard to the impact on areas of devolved responsibility. So, Presiding Officer, my call to colleagues across this chamber is let us speak clearly and seek to make a difference for families and communities across Scotland. We have demonstrated that when we provide the evidence base, when we identify Scotland's needs, particularly for families and children to have families located, particularly in our rural and remote areas that face depopulation, there's a real evidence base that we need something different here in Scotland. But let us also show that Scotland has a heart, that we are a country which values families and children and does not tear them apart. Let us make the case for change, for a fair, humane and compassionate approach to family migration which allows families to build their lives in Scotland and make a positive contribution to our society and our economy. Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. I now call Alexander Stewart to speak to and move Amendment 18885.1. Mr Stewart, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to be able to open this debate on the impact of the UK Government's family migration policy on Scotland on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives this afternoon, and I move the amendment in my name. Migration policy has always been a controversial topic, and we in the Scottish Conservatives have for some time been seeking assurances and pressurising the UK Government and ministers to listen and act on our concerns and demands. Leaving the European Union presents the United Kingdom with a unique opportunity to develop and shape a new, fairer immigration system that can work for all parts of the United Kingdom, and its opportunities should be seized by us all. The UK Government has taken note of some of these concerns, and there has now been a raft of migration policies that have come out recently, and we welcome these. It has said that if the UK leaves the EU without a deal, freedom of movement will end. We want a deal. We should do all we can to achieve a deal. But EU citizens' rights will be guaranteed, and they will see and be covered by the Free Temporary Leave to Remain scheme until the new migration system comes live. This will ensure minimum disruption while we put together the arrangements to chart the new course for migration. In anticipation of changes of the policy, time is tight. I'd like to make some progress at the moment. Thank you. In anticipation of changes to the migration policy following Brexit, the UK Government have now commissioned the Migration Advisory Committee to assess international points-based models. This is in preparation for the UK moving towards a point-based immigration system that will ensure that we continue to attract the best and the brightest from around the world.
Can I just say, Mr Stewart, sorry to interrupt you, there is a little time in hand for intervention. Of course, it's entirely a matter for you, but to make it a debate, there is time in hand.
Okay, thank you. This will mean that we can prioritise what people can contribute to Scotland and the UK rather than where they come from. Indeed, it is exactly the same type of immigration system that the SNP proposed for an independent Scotland in their 2013 White Paper on separation. All too often in recent years, however, politicians have spent significant amounts of time and energy blaming Westminster and criticising the UK Government for their immigration policy. And we acknowledge that, presiding officer. We have been uncomfortable in the Scottish Conservatives about that process, and we have challenged and we continue to challenge. Indeed, we should be looking to have a constructive dialogue about how we can deliver a better immigration policy that works for all and that works for Scotland. That is what the Scottish Conservatives have...
Cabinet Secretary.
I appreciate the points the member's making. It's taken 7 long years for the Tories to undo the damage that has been done. But in the spirit of what he's saying, particularly in relation to the subject of this debate, which is family migration, would he join with us and my colleague Ben McPherson, as other members of other parties have done, to work constructively to present a case on behalf of all of the Scottish Parliament to try and influence the changes that are about to take place in relation to the development of that immigration policy?
Mr Stewart, you will get your time back.
Thank you. I think if there is the need for us to try and come together, I don't see there should be any obstacles in trying to achieve that. Because as you've rightly pointed out, working together we can achieve things, and we have done that in the past. So I would be more than happy to have some dialogue going forward. That is why the Scottish Conservatives have always done when it comes to the UK migration policy. We have always intimated and agreed that our Westminster colleagues, and we have not always agreed with them, when it comes to where they want to take us and what they wanted to approach. But we have been positive and proactive at suggesting what they can do and where we should be going. And that has paid some dividends for us. We called for the scheme that we ensure that the agricultural sector would continue to have access to seasonal workers after Brexit. And the UK Government has listened, and earlier this year began a pilot for 2,500 non-EU agricultural workers and runs until December next year. We have long campaigned for an enhanced post-study work visa to support Scottish higher education and research sectors, as well as discussing, that has been discussed already in the Chamber. And I pay tribute this week to Liz Smith and to Ruth Davison, what they've achieved in that. But I also pay tribute to the sector themselves, because that sector in the universities and research have been very strong in putting forward their case. And I'm delighted that that has now been recognised, and we have seen a change in the way we go forward on that. Once again, the UK Government has listened, and it's just introduced a 2-year study work visa. And the anxiety that we've already heard and the collaboration that needs to take place between Westminster and Holyrood is exactly what the people expect us to do, and they deserve to do. So, as I said, Minister, it's very good that we talk and we have that dialogue, because I do believe having that, it can achieve more for us. The same principle applies when it comes to the debate around family migration. Under the current system, there are some restrictions on family members who wish to migrate to the UK from non-EEA countries. Partners of British citizens require a visa to come and live in the UK for 6 months or more. They must be able to demonstrate certain levels of proficiency in English language and minimum salary, and that's already been talked about. As we talk about immigration, family migration, it's a very controversial and emotive issue. It is a very normal and indeed an innate human desire for members of families to want to be close to one another. No one wants to see children forced to live. No one wants to see children forced to live thousands of miles away, or for people to have been able to care for elderly relatives. The current UK family migration rules primarily admit spouses and supports children, while there are greater restrictions on elderly relatives who want to come here. Family migration is something which we all want to do to accommodate the best we can. But we need a family migration system that is fair for people from all countries, while ensuring that those family members who migrate to the UK have appropriate opportunities. As we've said, since the desire to leave the European Union, we have an opportunity, and a great opportunity, for us to create a fundamentally better immigration system for the whole of the United Kingdom. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we in the Scottish Conservatives very much welcome the Government's plans to review the migration system, including family migration, and hope that all parties can work together constructively across the Chamber to work with the UK Government to find solutions. It's about finding solutions that work better for individuals and for Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Stewart. I now call Claire Baker. Ms Baker, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome this afternoon's debate on family migration policy. As the Cabinet Secretary said, the announcement on the post-study work visa is very welcome, and the cross-party effort in Scotland should be recognised. It is a small step in the right direction, but we need more. We know that Scotland is facing serious demographic challenges, and that migration will play an important part in addressing our needs in healthcare, in education and in many industries. In this afternoon's debate, there are 2 issues to consider. First, how the current immigration system is damaging to family migration, has inherent inequalities in its operation, and the impact it's having on people who want to make their homes here in Scotland and across the UK. Secondly, it is to consider what future immigration policy will look like after the UK leaves the EU, and how a continuation of the current approach will damage our economy, our society and our culture. This afternoon, Scottish Labour will be supporting the Scottish Government motion. Our 2015 manifesto committed to scrapping the minimum income threshold, which was introduced by the Conservative Liberal coalition in 2012, setting an annual income of £18,600, rising to £22,400 for one child, with a further £2,400 for each additional child, places a barrier to family reunification for those on lower and moderate incomes. This applies equally to a non-EEA citizen who is a partner of a British citizen, or a non-British citizen with indefinite leave to remain. This policy discriminates against working people on lower incomes, people who will often be doing work which is vital to our economy and our social fabric, and in jobs which are sometimes difficult to recruit to. The sharp increase in incomes for each child further discriminates against families and splits parents and child. The child policy, although upheld by the Supreme Court, was criticised for the lack of safeguards for the welfare of children. The Conservatives' obsession with reducing immigration, in the face of evidence over the benefits of immigration, led them to treat families in the same way as any other migration, and continue with a policy that puts family reunification beyond the means of too many people. This is an approach which must be changed if the UK is to uphold values of compassion and fairness. A report by Oxfam and the Refugee Council in 2018 found that 3/4 of refugee families in the UK have been separated from relatives who are not eligible for family reunification under existing immigration rules. The UK Government adopts a restrictive approach to family, denying too many refugees, including children, the right to be reunified with their families. Government policy continues to break up families, and we need to change that approach so that it recognises the right to family life and the need for vulnerable people who are here legitimately to have the support of their family. So we have seen a steady erosion of the family reunification rights of UK citizens. We now live in a global economy, and this impacts on the world of relationships as well as industry. There does need to be a process of checks and balances when relationships require immigration rules, but they need to be fair, transparent and reasonable. We have a responsibility to UK citizens to appreciate the way in which the world has changed and have an immigration system that reasonably supports their decisions. It is very concerning that leaving the EU under the current proposals will mean that freedom of movement for EU citizens will be replaced with the current family migration policies. For families who currently live in the UK, they have access to the Settled Status Scheme. In recent weeks, I've met with the Perth EU Citizen Support Service and was at the launch of the Fife EU Settlement Scheme, and both report a worryingly low rate of applications at this stage. Of course, the uncertainty surrounding the UK's relationship with the EU could be contributing to that, but we need to all support efforts to make application as easy as possible and support families staying together. I recognise the conciliatory tone of the Tories' amendment, but given the Tories have only had recently to roll back from the declaration that freedom of movement would end abruptly in a no deal, the intention is still to replace it with a restrictive immigration system, which is clear from the White Paper. The White Paper's focus on income and economic needs does not recognise the human factor which is needed in an immigration system, which can bring long-lasting benefits to our country. People need the opportunity to not only work in the UK, but also settle in the UK, to have a family, to contribute to community life, to bring diversity and enhance our society. There is evidence to show that those who come as family migrants are more likely to settle in the UK long term, compared to those who are here to study or work. Scotland's demographic challenge shows that we need more migrants who take that decision, and we have a history, as the rest of the UK does, of containing settled communities who make significant contributions to our country. The focus of today's debate is the need for urgent change to the UK Government's restrictive family migration policies, damaging to families but also to society and the economy. We can send a strong message of the need for change, not only for Scotland, but as Labour's manifesto and policy agenda demonstrates, for the whole of the UK. Thank you.
I call Patrick Harvey for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the Government's motion on this issue today. However, I do feel it's worded very diplomatically. It says that the UK has the least family-friendly immigration policies in the developed world. I don't think this fully captures the horror and the callousness of the UK Government's immigration policies. The UK Government is not just least family-friendly, it is overtly hostile and racist. Last week, my colleague Ross Greer highlighted a couple of individual cases. The example of the Home Office officials who were alleged to have lied to their European counterparts in order to illegally deport the child trafficking victims. But there are many other such examples. We're all familiar with examples from the Windrush generation, for example. They include Paulette Wilson, a mother and grandmother who was detained by the Home Office and threatened with a deportation to a country she'd left as a child 50 years previously. She was minutes away from deportation to Jamaica before receiving a reprieve. Richard Stewart was a father. He was told that he'd overstayed and was denied a passport when he wanted to visit his mother's grave in Jamaica. He died before receiving an apology or any compensation from the UK Government. Sarah O'Connor, a mother, was denied benefits due to not having a passport and was unable to get a job. She ended up having to declare bankruptcy, and she also died before receiving an apology or compensation. At least 83 members of the Windrush generation were deported, and the Home Office has been unable to contact 42 of them. At least 11 have died since, but the full number may be higher. Countless other people have had their lives turned upside down as they've lost jobs, been denied welfare and become homeless because of the racism of the Home Office. In many cases, people have spent thousands of pounds and been driven into poverty, challenging Home Office decisions. Compensations being promised, but not forthcoming. And it's not just the Windrush generation either. The Home Office was so keen to detain one Nigerian woman that they even held her baby son in detention with her. Over 600 children under the age of 11 have been detained since the government claimed that it was committed to ending child detention back in 2010. The Home Office has proved time and time again that there is no tactic too underhand for them. They used a child's medical records, comments she had provided when suicidal to a psychiatric nurse, in an attempt to deport a family to Albania by claiming that they were lying about their asylum application. How many families have been thrown into turmoil because of the racism and incompetence of the Home Office? These are examples of the results of deliberate government policy. Now, some changes have been made following the Windrush revelations, but for the most part, these policies remain. And in fact, the government continues to make the hostile environment even worse. They've now announced that they intend to end family reunification for child asylum seekers, known as the Dublin Regulation, if they succeed in taking the UK out of the EU without a deal. And we have to remember that many of these policies originate from before 2015. It wasn't just the current Conservative government. When they were introduced, they were aided and abetted by the Liberal Democrats. And prior to that, New Labour also oversaw the detention of thousands of children for immigration purposes. The scale of these problems are too great to solve with a few policy changes at the edges. It's not just that this isn't working for Scotland. If a hostile environment did work for Scotland, it would still be wrong. It doesn't work for people. It's clear that racism is embedded in the Home Office. That organisation itself must be abolished if we're going to achieve a migration system that is based on compassion and support.
We now move to the open debate and speeches of 4 minutes, please. John McAlpine, followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Excuse me, Presiding Officer, I have a problem with my laptop.
Would you like to perhaps move to the next?
If you don't mind,
yes,
thank you very
please
much.
do. Sorry, move to the next desk or?
Sorry, it's not the desk, it's the laptop.
Oh,
It's,
sorry, I misheard you, Ms McAlpin. I'll tell you what then, we shall have Fulton McGregor, followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's no exaggeration to say that the UK's family migration policy is one of the least family-friendly immigration policies in the developed world. The 2015 Migration Integration Policy Index stated that the UK had one of the most restrictive and expensive paths to settle permanently and become UK citizens. And remember, as Patrick Harvey has just said, this research was compiled before the Brexit vote occurred. And given the rhetoric taking place just now around leaving the EU, I cannot imagine that these policies will become any more open in the foreseeable future. Just last year, we saw the UK government's appalling treatment of the Windrush generation, and this is not the type of policy that we should wish to have here in Scotland. Perhaps, Presiding Officer, the UK government's approach can be best understood from Theresa May's 2013 statement, when I quote, she said, "We can deport first and hear appeals later." And also, I quote again, "There are some who seem to think that the right to family life should always take precedence over public interest in immigration control." And I wonder, Presiding Officer, if the Tory members here today would care to say in their speeches when they talk later whether this is something that they themselves agree with. Scotland needs people to come and settle here. It has been a major driver for our economy. Scottish people are living longer and having less children. This has created a gap in our workforce, which has been supplemented by those who come from overseas and make Scotland their home. Those who come to Scotland to live and work contribute by growing our economy and contributing taxes for our public services. Scotland relies on migration for population growth more than any other part of the UK, and this applies to both EEA and non-EEA people. And that's why I hope that everyone across the chamber tonight will vote for the government motion and support the calls to scrap the minimum income threshold at 18,600 and implement a fair and a humane approach to family migration. Regarding EU citizens specifically, we are still in the dark as to what rights EU citizens will have post-Brexit. The Home Secretary's remarks last month showed that the current UK government wishes to end freedom of movement as soon as possible. Any restriction of freedom of movement will be severely detrimental to Scotland's economy. And Scottish Government analysis, as has already been said, shows that on average each additional EU citizen working in Scotland adds over £10,000 to government revenue and over £34,000 to GDP each year. Presiding Officer, I want to take a moment just to mention briefly some local examples of how these policies are affecting people in real life. And colleagues may remember the situation involving Derek and Ola Mary from Coatbridge that I raised in here last year. Mrs Mary is from Belarus and works as a translator. They have a daughter who was born here in Scotland, but despite this, she received quite a hostile message from the Home Office telling her she had no right to work or study and that she had 7 days to leave the UK. 7 days to leave her husband and young daughter. I, of course, wrote to the Home Office and the Prime Minister, and our Cabinet Secretary for Culture, Tourism and External Affairs did likewise, and ultimately the Home Office relented. But this was only after the case received significant media attention. Not everybody will get that. And if the Marys hadn't contacted the local representatives, the UK migration policy would have split this family up. This is not acceptable. Indeed, this family still live with the issue of uncertainty over their status every single day. I spoke to Mr Mary just a few days ago. This is not acceptable. Presiding Officer, I wanted to also give another example of constituents that came to me just a couple of weeks ago, and that they'd received a response from the UK government regarding a visitor on a short-term visa. This visitor was coming to celebrate a significant christening. They were reported that they were provided with a standard letter that didn't even match up with the information provided and didn't ask for any further information. Of course, I wrote to the UK Visas and Immigration Department, and I'm grateful that diligent and hard-working staff there noted the discrepancy, sought the required information, and ultimately had the decision reversed. And this is where I disagree a wee bit with Patrick Carvey, although not the main point of his argument, but this again actually demonstrates the faults of the policy and not the staff at the Home Office and their departments. It's the policy and these immigration policies across the board that is at fault here and needs to be changed and more flexible in taking into account individual circumstances.
You must close, please.
And I'll close on that, Presiding Officer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now have Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, followed by John McAlpine.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin by emphasising again what I said to the Chamber in our immigration debate last week. Both Scotland and the wider UK owe a great deal to migration. This is a country that has historically been one of openness and of tolerance, and one with a global outlook. And this is true now as it has ever been. In international terms, the UK has a high level of immigration in relation to its population size. And this is testament not only to our immigration system, but also the popularity of the UK as a destination. People want to come to this country, and we all benefit from that. However, it is also the responsibility of government to administer a fair, rules-based immigration system, one that recognises the needs of our communities, and one that takes account of the areas of our economy where immigration can be of most benefit. As the Chamber knows, the UK government is working towards the creation of a new system. This will reflect a new approach after the end of the EU's free movement rules, when the UK's immigration policy will be wholly set by the United Kingdom. Quite rightly, there is a wide process of consultation taking place at the moment. During last week's debate, I emphasised the importance of passing a withdrawal agreement that will give the country the best opportunity to prepare our future migration policy and will avoid a no-deal Brexit. And the same point applies here. Equally, I would hope that this is a process that the Scottish Government is fully engaged with. I don't expect the UK Government and the Scottish Government to agree on every point, but consultation is an important exercise that will inform the creation of a system that reflects the needs of the whole of the UK. As Alexander Stewart highlighted, just last week the Home Office announced a new graduate route, which will make new arrangements for post-study work. This follows several years where the parties in this chamber have been in agreement that post-study work is an area that needs attention and that a new route should be created. After much scrabbling around for some reason to criticise the announcement, the SNP finally settled on calling it a screeching Tory U-turn, ignoring the fact that this side of the chamber has been advocating for a post-study work scheme to be renewed for years. In short, the views of the parties, of universities, of academic institutions, as well as the views of business and employees were heard. We can also point to the issues arising with seasonal agricultural work. My colleague Christine Hare, as MP for Angus, represents a constituency famed particularly for its soft fruit production. Again, I'll just finish this bit. Again, we've seen a positive response from the UK government to these needs, with progress made on creating a seasonal agricultural workers scheme. I'll take from the Cabinet Secretary sheet first.
Fiona Hislop.
The agricultural seasonal pilot is tiny compared to the needs of the agricultural sector. And similarly, if we just focus on the brightest and best in terms of graduates, we ignore the main issue that Scotland needs, which is families. If people come individually for agricultural seasonal work that's temporary, they're not going to bring their families with them. Will he work with us to ensure that it's families that we can get arriving in Scotland to stay in Scotland and to help tackle our depopulation in 14 out of our local authority areas?
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you very much. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that intervention. I mean, there's two things here that I would say. As Alexander Stewart said, we will work where we agree with the government. We agree there are areas that will be of benefit to Scotland that we can work with. But also, I think what we're trying to highlight here is that actually working with the UK government, actually engaging with a consultation has seen results, and it would be good if we saw that from wider across this chamber. Today,
Mr Harper-Johnson's just closing.
Today, the Scottish Government has raised the minimum income threshold for dependent family members who are seeking to come to the UK. In this case, there is a clear balance between migrants' perfectly reasonable wish to bring family members and partners to live with them in the UK and government's responsibility to wider society. Quite legitimately, those who come to the UK do not always have the recourse to public funds. In circumstances such as this, it is clear that a family member must be able to provide adequately for that person. We know that under the current scheme, there are circumstances where different considerations apply, exceptional circumstances, such as situations where the right to a private and family life under the European Convention are triggered.
You must close, please.
Okay. There is a legitimate debate how to apply minimum income requirements for the family of those moving here to work, but we should be aware of those additional hurdles a differentiated system creates, not only for governments but also for migrants themselves who receive additional restrictions. Presiding Officer, I hope that the Scottish Government and my colleagues around this chamber play a full part in the current process as we move towards a new immigration system that better fits our needs.
We have run out of time. I'm going to have to cut the final speeches. I'll let you know shortly by how much. And I'll have to cut people off at 4 minutes at this point. So, Joan McAlpine, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to concentrate my opening remarks on the most vulnerable group affected by these rules, refugees. And among refugees, the most vulnerable group are unaccompanied children. As Amnesty's briefing for today's debate points out, children who are in the UK alone and who have refugee status have no right to be reunited with even their closest family members. And because of this rule, children living in safety in the UK live without their family for perpetuity. The Home Affairs Select Committee has criticised this, using the word perverse to describe the situation in which children who have been granted refugee status in the UK are not then allowed to bring close family to join them. And I want to put this cruelty into some kind of historical context. It's now 80 years since the last Kindertransport brought Jewish children from Nazi Germany to the safety of the UK in 1939. And the rescue programme began after Kristallnacht the previous year, in which Jewish homes and communities were terrorised by Nazi thugs. Now, Kindertransport transported 10,000 unaccompanied children to safety, and it's historically portrayed as a humanitarian gesture, but aspects were heartless because parents were not allowed to accompany these children who were fostered out to complete strangers, and of course many of them never saw their parents again because they were unable to follow their children to safety and they died in the extermination camps. Great Britain and other countries knew the situation for Jewish people under the Nazis was intolerable, but they still restricted immigration. At the 1938 Evian Conference, the UK, France and the United States left without committing to change their restrictive immigration policies. That was relaxed with Kindertransport, but it was made very clear that it would only apply to children aged under 17 and parents and older children were not included. So looking back at Kindertransport today, that rule seems absolutely barbaric, and you might otherwise have been forgiven to think it would never happen today, that we would have a more humanitarian approach. But as we have heard already, that's not true. Today's rules are really not so very different from those that applied to the Kindertransport family all those years ago. Amnesty also point out the deep unfairness in terms of how we treat the children of refugee parents who don't get asylum status in this country. They're only allowed to bring children with them under family immigration rules if those children are under 18. And again, this seems terribly uncaring as well as unrealistic. A 19-year-old is officially an adult, but anyone with grown-up children here knows that young people up to the age of 25 or 26 still require a great deal of support. Indeed, this Parliament has previously recognised that very point. We passed legislation in the form of the Children and Young People's Act in 2014 that recognised the right of care-experienced young people to have support up until the age of 26. And I was proud to have sat on the committee that put that into place, but there was very little persuasion needed, because we all know that we all support, those of us who are parents, we support our children well into adulthood, helping them with accommodation, supporting them through relationship breakups, job loss, exam pressures, all the other challenges that life throws at them. If children from privileged backgrounds need this continuing parental support, how much more do the most vulnerable young people require it, whether they're care experienced or indeed refugees fleeing from persecution, or indeed migrant children who are split up from their families through these rules. Of course, the rules do not only apply to refugees. Around 15,000 children are reckoned to be living without a parent in the UK because of this migration system, which we are now planning to extend in the future to EU citizens. So I agree with the wider points made about Scotland's need for migrants, but I wanted to concentrate on the humanitarian aspects of this, which are completely unacceptable. Thank you.
Pauline McNeill, followed by Emma Harper.
Immigration and asylum policy is, I think, one of the hardest policy areas. Who would want to be a minister making those kinds of decisions? But most of us have witnessed the scenes of the last few years of children trying to reach Europe and Britain, fleeing conflict and war that we have been involved in ourselves. The most notable one will be Alan Kurdi, the child who was washed up on the beach, and probably poor Alan's body lying there on the beach, perhaps changed public opinion to show them the actual reality of humanity and how these decisions affect children across the world. According to Oxfam, 3/4 of refugee families in the UK have been separated from relatives because they're not eligible for family reunification under existing immigration rules. But children of those eligible to remain sometimes are deported because they are not eligible despite having lived in the country for a number of years. It's one of the ones that broke my heart the most, to think that a child could live here with their family and when they turn 18 can be deported back. What is the sense in that when their family is here? I've made friends with a Syrian family who arrived here under the resettlement project, and they approached me some years ago telling me about the sister who they left behind, who was not selected to join their family. You see how hard it is for families, because they probably will never see their sister ever again unless we can finally get to the end of the conflict of the Syrian war. But most notably, it was Lord Alf Dubs, a refugee himself, who said that we cannot allow the far right to exploit the refugee and migration issues here, but we must take time to show the human aspects of family separation and get the public behind a kinder policy. Because the UK arbitrarily capped the number of lone children to 480, and I think it's been a harmful policy. Children living in appalling conditions in northern France, which I saw myself when I visited the Calais jungle when it was there, and the Greek islands too, with no family to care for them. Alf Dubs says that probably it should be a European-wide project, but if the UK is to be part of a wider humanitarian policy, we should certainly be doing that with our other European neighbours. But it's been that hostile background to immigration and asylum seeking that leads us to where we are today, which is a crazy and unhelpful approach to European citizens who've witnessed that, and now the lack of confirming and giving them confidence under the Brexit policy to let them live here with their families is nothing short of shocking. Priti Patel, the new Home Office Minister, announced that freedom of movement will end on the 31st of October. And all she's interested in is to be able to say that it will end regardless of any of the aspects of whether that is sensible or not. And furthermore, there are reports that she wants to toughen the Home Office stance on immigration by using secondary legislation, which, again, you'll see that will not like to be any scrutiny. I want to close, Presiding Officer, because I know I have about a minute left, because I wholeheartedly support what Fiona Hislop said to this chamber today about the need for a policy for Scotland that recognises that we have a decline in our population, and apart from any values that we hold about immigration, is a necessity here to have a policy that allows us to be able to do that. If we are truly partners with the United Kingdom, with a devolved parliament. It seems to me there's got to be more movement by the UK government on recognising that Scotland's economy will be harmed if they do not allow a flexible immigration policy to identify the industry sectors where we need more workers and the fact that we need more. There are solutions to this. Claire Baker's talked about it in the Chamber on many occasions. I wholeheartedly support this flexibility and I hope that it's going to happen.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut the last two speakers to 3.5 minutes each. That's Mr Green and Mr Kidd. Emma Harper, followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome this debate and the need for this Parliament to highlight why the current UK system of migration is failing communities across Scotland. When talking about migration, we are talking about people who choose to come to Scotland, like my husband, who is a new Scot, originally from the USA. He chose to come here to live, to work like others, and to contribute to our proud, diverse society. I'd like to focus my contribution this afternoon on two main points. The first being the need for a different approach to migration in Scotland, and the second, the lessons to be learned from the current out-of-touch UK system. Presiding Officer, Scotland faces different challenges in relation to population, demography and rurality from the rest of the UK. 2,500 seasonal agricultural workers for the whole of the UK is absolutely not enough for the whole of the UK. 650 is what's been allocated as Scotland's share. That won't pick the berries of Marie Goujon's constituents in her constituency. We need our population growth as a main driver of economic growth in Scotland. And the UK, in recent years, it shows that the best way to boost our economy is through investing in people by attracting people here. We have a population that's grown older, we have a population that shows a rise in people retiring, and we have a working age population that is reducing. The Scottish Government's own analysis, for example, shows that on average each additional citizen from the EU alone working in Scotland adds over £10,000 of government revenue and over £34,000 to GDP each year. Presiding Officer, instead of welcoming people to the UK Government puts barriers and hurdles in the way. I point to the regulations on family reunification, which means that families and partners of people here find it harder to come to work and live with their families. Information from the Observatory on Migration shows that family reunification has actually decreased by 30% under this Conservative government. The system is broken and it must be fixed. Presiding Officer, my office has had several constituents come for help with immigration issues. And although MPs should be picking up these reserved cases, I have had local residents contact me directly because of slow or even no response from the constituency Conservative members of the UK Parliament. Here's one local example. The Sabita family, the mum and dad are from Tunisia, and the 4 children, 3 of them who are born in Scotland, they have made their home in Dumfries for 7 years. They were facing imminent deportation to Tunisia simply because they could not afford to pay the almost £8,000 fee for processing their family visa application. And while a Home Office decision is being appealed, the family, they were not allowed to work, earn or even seek welfare support. This was the case for the Sabitas. They relied on the generosity of a local charity, Mool, and their mosque and their neighbours for help. Thankfully, with help from the First Minister and the Minister for Migration, I was able to help overturn this decision, and the family have since been granted leave to remain. This, however, is not the case for hundreds of others across the UK. Presiding Officer, the UK Government's current family migration policies are considered to be one of the least family-friendly in the developed world. The current proposed minimum salary threshold of £18,600 is prohibitive and does not take account of many sectors across the country, such as healthcare, catering or hospitality. I would like again to put my thanks on record in conclusion, Presiding Officer, and join the support that the Cabinet Secretary does all she can do to continue to devolve any powers for migration and immigration to this place. Thank you.
Jamie Green, followed by Bill Kidd.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Can I just start at the outset, having listened to this debate, and can I say to the 30,000 civil servants that work in the UK Home Office, we don't all think that you're racist. And I think to insist that that is the case... no, please let me make my point here. Please let me make my point. Mr Harvey said 4 times that the Home Office was racist, and I think that is an inappropriate way to speak about the civil servants. You've had your opportunity. I've only got 3 minutes to speak. And can I also say, actually, in reference to another speech that was made in the limited time I have, that I think we should be proud as a country of every life that was laid down during the Second World War to fight for children who were escaping the hell of Nazi Germany, British lives and Scottish lives, and many of them are our ancestors who fought for their freedom. So let's not play down the role that we played in this debate either, because the hyperbolic attitude that some of the members have, I think, differs from the very genuine comments that I heard from the outset from the Cabinet Secretary, who I think made some very valid points about the motion today. Look, these benches from in many debates about immigration have been very clear on whether we've agreed or not with the proposals coming out of Whitehall. And in many cases, we've agreed with the centre benches. We've had discussions around where there are areas of, I think, shared commonality that the needs of Scotland... I really don't have the time. I wish I did, or I would. I'm sorry. And I think there is some commonality that we need to look at in terms of cross-party discussion about immigration. It's a very sensitive issue. There needs to be dialogue, and I think a little bit more respectful dialogue, I would say, about this. There needs to be also dialogue between governments, not just between us as members, and between governments and the industries of which we're seeking to serve. There is also a myth, I think, in this whole debate that somehow attitudes towards immigration are hugely different in Scotland to the rest of the UK. We know that they're not. Poll after poll and survey after survey shows that. Indeed, I was surprised to read in a recent survey that around half of Scots felt that immigration levels were too high. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that comment, but it was an interesting piece of analysis to come out. Scotland is, in fact, according to numerous surveys, the only part of the UK where attitudes towards immigration seem to have even stiffened in some communities since 2016. Now, I think we should be mindful of that outside of the political bubble, there clearly are reservations about the sort of free movement that has been advocated by the government benches in their motion and in debates like this. We know that we have a deficit of skills. We know that we have an issue with our working age population. But despite 40 years of free movement in Europe, our immigration rates fall well below the rest of the UK's. Immigration policy isn't simply about setting rules or entry criteria. We need to have a joined-up adult discussion about how we nurture talent, about how we retain skills, and about how we educate people that we have the talents that we need, so we're not losing people south of the border or indeed elsewhere. If the government is serious about having an influencing reserve policy about this, then I guarantee you these benches will have a constructive and serious conversation about it if the tone is genuine and respectful on this issue. But judging by today's motion, I'm afraid I don't think it pays justice to the front benches. I think we can all do better than that.
Thank you. The last of the open debate speakers is Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Here in the Scottish Parliament, we recognise the benefits of migration to our nation. Those who move to Scotland to work or to study find new friends, a new home and a new way of life. They contribute in many ways to our nation and they make it vibrantly diverse. Migration is not just visa applications and bureaucratic process, it is deeply personal. It is a pioneering and adventurous approach to life. Migration is made up of many people who love Scotland and want to call it home. I think it is important that we recognise this personal aspect in discussing this topic of debate today. Presiding Officer, it is in this Parliament's interest to work towards incentivising inward migration. Scotland has unique demographic circumstances. From the 1960s until the turn of the millennium, there was an almost constant drop in population. This is in contrast to the rest of the UK, which has seen almost constant growth over the same period. So there are differences that need to be addressed. This demographic polarisation necessitates a tailored solution to encourage migration into Scotland, because our story is now one of population and economic growth due to the positive benefits of migration. However, this is under threat from the impending loss of freedom of movement and the hostile environment faced by those wanting to make Scotland their home. The context of Brexit compounds our need for tailored migration policy. Devolving some migration powers to our Scottish Government ministers and this Parliament, or collaboration with the UK Government over regional specific visas, would facilitate policy that has the capacity to be responsive to Scotland's acute needs. Projections from the National Records of Scotland and the Office for National Statistics show that natural change, i.e. the number of births minus the number of deaths, is predicted to be negative in Scotland for each of the next 25 years. This topic should not be divisive. Scotland needs an approach to migration that makes it possible for people to live here on normal salaries with their spouses and children by their sides. It is in our collective interest to create a welcoming environment and visa process, one that is notably different from the current system. To do so, we have to recognise the current system's difficulties, and this way we can identify how to make it easier for people to live, work and make a home for themselves here in Scotland. I had a lot of really good stuff to say there, but I can't actually have the time. So if we have the opportunity to tailor a Scottish visa system, I encourage and urge engagement with issues like this. By doing so, we can allow families to stay together and to call Scotland their home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. Your brevity is appreciated. We now move to the closing speeches, and of course everyone should be back in the chamber. And I call Alex Rowley for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It has been generally a well-meaning debate, I think, where people seem to agree that the key proposition of the motion, which is that UK policy is failing families. It's failing families of refugees, and it's failing families who have come here as economic immigrants. So if that principle is accepted, then there has to be some room, I would have thought, for us to work together. I note the point that the motion says that Scotland's distinct population needs means that all of its future population growth is projected to come from migration. It would be also a true fact to say that the current immigration policies are failing Scotland. But I note that the Cabinet Secretary talks about the moral case, and undoubtedly there is, but you also talk about Scotland being a welcoming place, and I do take the point that Jamie Green did make in terms of, if you look at attitudes, social attitudes in Scotland. I think all of us have responsibility and have more work to do to project and talk about publicly the benefits of immigration and the need for economic immigration coming into Scotland. You just need to go and knock doors any place in Scotland, Presiding Officer, and you will get that point being made, absolutely.
James Dornan.
Intervention. I mean, I accept the point you're saying that there may well be views that are held by individuals that are not what we would see as being much different from what is held in other parts of the UK. But would you not also accept that government and the main political parties have shown a completely different view to immigration in Scotland than they have in the rest of the, well, certainly in the English part of the UK?
Alex Rowley.
Well, yeah, I mean, but the point I'm trying to make to Mr Doran is that we need to make the case, a positive case, for more people coming to live. I thought the Cabinet Secretary's point about when families come here, there's more likelihood that they will put their roots down here and stay here. So I think we are in agreement in that way. And current government Westminster policy is not serving the needs of the people of Scotland. So no problem with that. But let's be honest. You know, part of the belief around immigration being a major problem is because politicians have failed to tackle that issue and actually make the case. So when you knock on somebody's door and they start telling you that immigration is a problem, and you start to go through what the issues are, it's issues like a lackey housing, queues for NHS, etc., not immigration. And when you start to make the case for immigration, then hopefully we will build that support across Scotland, and people will come here and have a good experience and experience the friendliness that we would all like to think that Scotland is. All I'm saying is let's not be complacent in terms of that. But we need to be open to examine what alternative immigration policies can be brought forward and how we can work together. And I hope for the positive contribution for Alexander Stewart that the Tory party is willing to come to that discussion. It should not be beyond us to find an immigration policy that's right for Scotland, and that should not create a constitutional crisis. So let's work together with the government to find that way forward.
Colin Donald Cameron for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's clear this has been a spirited debate, and I'll keep my remarks brief given the limited time available. But one thing that we should all remember when we discuss immigration is the people at the centre of this debate. And that was a point that the Cabinet Secretary rightly acknowledged. It's easy to get caught up in the sheer politics of this, but away from some of what has been spoken in the Chamber today, however passionately, it remains the case that we are talking about the fate of real people, their lives, their stories, and most importantly, their futures. I want to state clearly that the Scottish Conservatives believe immigration is hugely invigorating and positive for Scotland. It's good for our economy, with people coming and using their talents for the benefit of this country. It's good for society as it makes us more diverse and outward-looking, and it's good for our culture as it allows us to explore new ideas and enhance our own traditions. However, it is also important that immigration is managed and that the rules that are put in place are adhered to and applied fairly and equitably. And while there are mistakes made by the Home Office, it is right that there is an appeals process in place which is simple to navigate and can provide redress where appropriate. And in my past life as a lawyer, I have acted for asylum seekers in the tribunal in Glasgow. I have seen firsthand the challenges presented to those who are victims of the immigration system. And I understand the worry that many people feel when a loved one is caught up in that system. And I acknowledge the cases that have been referred to, but we have to apply the rules equally and in fairness to everyone should not promote a situation where there is one rule for some and another rule for others. And in my view, it would be wrong to suggest that the UK government has not reformed our immigration system for the better, with a marked and positive change in approach most recently. And Alexander Stewart and others have mentioned some of these points, but they bear repeating. For example, I strongly welcome the announcement to reintroduce the 2-year post-study work visa, which will allow international graduates in any subject to be able to stay in the UK for 2 years to find work. That was something we've long campaigned for here, with Liz Smith and Ruth Davidson both advocating some kind of system in the past. And it's something that Universities UK have welcomed. It will put us back, they say, back where we belong as a first-choice study destination. Not only will a wide range of employers now have access to talented graduates from around the world, these students hold lifelong links in the UK. And I should also briefly touch on the proposed 30,000 minimum threshold for highly skilled migrants seeking 5-year visas. Many of us think this proposal, and it is only a proposal, deserves reconsideration. And I am pleased to note that in June of this year, the then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, asked the Migration Advisory Committee to review salary thresholds and to consider whether more flexibility was required. And Pauline McNeill spoke about flexibility. Well, that's an example, in my view, of the UK government considering that there should be more flexibility. And whilst these benches do not support the devolution of immigration or a differentiated immigration system for Scotland, given the detrimental impact that would have on many business organisations who rely on there being a UK-wide system, what we do promote is a UK-wide system which works for Scotland and addresses Scotland's needs. And leaving the EU presents a unique opportunity to develop a responsive migration system that does just that. The UK government just announced it would move to a points-based system to attract migrants. And it's worth reminding the Chamber, this was demanded by the SNP in their 2013 White Paper on independence. Let me quote from that White Paper. We plan a controlled points-based system to support the migration of skilled workers for the benefit of Scotland's economy. So I look forward to the SNP supporting the UK government in this regard. And to sum up, Deputy Presiding Officer, can I reiterate my earlier remarks that this is a Parliament which has a duty to debate migration in a frank and honest manner. I personally believe there is more consensus around this subject than perhaps this debate has shown. Because it's right that the UK government is now reforming aspects of our immigration system to encourage people with skills to work and live here, and to make it easier for those who study in the UK, for example, to remain in the UK and utilise their talents here. Without doubt, the mood and tone of that government's approach is changing, and we strongly believe that these actions, Deputy Presiding Officer, amount to a fresh approach which should be sustained into issues around family migration. That would allow us all to work together and have a sensible and reasoned discussion about how we can improve family migration policy in a way that works for Scotland. Thank you.
I now call Fiona Hislop to wind up the debate. 7 minutes will take us to decision time. Please, Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, this debate is important, and I thank all colleagues for their contributions. The threat of the UK leaving the EU and the resulting end of free movement has thrown into sharp relief the deficiencies in the existing UK's domestic immigration system, which results in the forced separation of many families across the UK. And I think it's clear from across the chamber that everybody agrees there needs to be change. And I think there's an agreement that there needs to be a fair and humane and managed way of having a family migration system, but to have it changed, and that there is an urgency more than ever that that's changed positively for the needs of Scotland. It's been quite a broad debate on issues beyond family migration, but that is understandable. And there is a clear practical case for a change in family migration policy for Scotland. Figures released by National Records of Scotland on the 11th of September showed that the birth rate in Scotland is continuing to fall. The number of births registered in the second quarter of 2019 was 5.4% lower than in the same period of 2018. And this is the lowest number of Q2 births since civil registration began in 1855. Scotland needs people to come and build their lives here. Evidence shows that the ability to bring family members to Scotland is an important factor which encourages migrants to stay long term, not just for temporary seasonal work, however vital that is. People who can stay here, who we need to support our economy, our public services and our communities. And we can no longer afford to accept the punitive rules that exist just now at a time when we need families to come here. And Fulton Mackay also reminded us that migrants contribute £10,000 in revenue to the economy. We know that there are concerns, particularly about the UK's changes. We don't know the status of the UK's changes. If there is to be an opportunity for change in the UK's immigration system, if there is to be, I quote, a radical rewriting of our immigration system, as the Prime Minister suggests, then let this Parliament say clearly that improving the rules on family migration must be part of that rewriting. Now, the Conservatives have asked us to work with the rest of Scotland, which we do, and we have consistently and constantly engaged with the UK government on a variety of issues. I remember even speaking to Damien Green when he was Home Secretary about some of these issues. But what is the status of the Immigration White Paper? Do the Scottish Conservatives agree with the current UK White Paper, or is that UK White Paper a dead duck? Do we expect it to be scrapped? And do they agree with us that that UK Immigration White Paper should be scrapped in its current form? It's vital that the Scottish Government and this Parliament are fully involved in the development of the UK Government's proposals, and debates and discussions that we have must be open, and they must be frank, and they must be inclusive if we are to ensure that any new system truly works for Scotland and the interests of Scottish families. And I think if we as a Parliament can come together to shape that family migration policy, it will be all to the stronger if we do that collectively and cross-party. The proposals to end freedom of movement mean that people who in good faith have built their lives across Europe face having to navigate the barriers of the domestic migration system if they want to bring their non-UK family members to Scotland. In countries across the world, there are people who were born and brought up in Scotland who would love to return to bring their expertise and their experience back to Scotland. Yet the family migration rules mean that they cannot bring their spouse, their children with them to live in Scotland, and that cannot be right. And I want to address the points from Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, who said it is legitimate that migrants seek to bring family members in. Actually, in many cases, it's not migrants. It's actually UK citizens, in many cases, that are prevented from bringing their family members in. Alexander Stewart says leaving the EU provides an opportunity to review family migration system. It is the UK government which has reduced the rights of UK citizens to bring family members into the UK, and that policy is entirely separate to the EU. It was a decision of the UK government to reduce the rights of UK citizens to bring in family members. So I think there needs to be a bit of understanding of the family migration issues that we're trying to address. Pauline McNeill states that there's a practical case for change. But there is also that moral case as well, as many have referred to. And Scotland is a country that wants to welcome people, that doesn't tear families apart, that this is about the type of country we want to be and how we treat both those people who choose to come to Scotland, but also those people who were born and brought up here. The family migration rules are about removing the rights of UK citizens in pursuit of a meaningless migration target. And that's what we have to understand, which is why we've commissioned, or we'll be commissioning, the Expert Advisory Group on Migration and Population, and their work will be crucial in informing this debate, and I look forward to sharing their findings in due course. Very briefly.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful. The Cabinet Secretary seems to be implying that she would like that freedom of movement principle to apply globally, and if that's correct, I very much agree. But is it not astonishing that the political right constantly argue about human liberty and wanting small government not interfering with people's lives, except on the question of immigration, where they almost fetishise state power and state violence instead of individual liberty and freedom?
Fiona Hislop.
There is a moral case. We have to make sure that we provide political leadership in these debates. And I think Alec Riley was absolutely right. Every single person in this chamber, anybody that seeks political leadership, has to face down the arguments of the far right that have tried to politicise migration and immigration to an extent that it causes, I think, the individual fear that many have, and also is leading, I think, in some parts of the world to a type of, I think, tension that is extremely worrying indeed. But we can and we should do something about this in Scotland. So, Presiding Officer, my call today is for members across the chamber to join this debate, send a clear message about the needs of Scotland's communities. We all collectively need to be successful in persuading UK ministers to change decisions on individual cases, but more importantly, we need to change the policy. We can be positive and constructive in how we do that. We may have different means by which we want to have those powers to make those decisions, but let us shape a family migration policy that's fit for the 21st century, is fit for the Scotland that we seek, but also is fit for the children and the families that we serve, whether they come from Scotland, whether they come to Scotland from the rest of Europe, or indeed if they want to come here from other parts of the world. Scotland is not full up. We have a welcoming approach to maintain, but we also want to make sure that it's fit for purpose. Let us develop a migration policy for families that's fit for purpose for Scotland.
Thank you very much, and that concludes our debate on the impact of the UK Government's family migration policy on Scotland. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 18932 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau setting out a revision to this week's business. No member wishes to speak on the motion. Therefore, could I ask Graham Day to move the motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And the question is that motion 18932 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. We turn to the decision time. The first question is that Amendment 1884.1 in the name of Pauline McNeill, which seeks to amend motion 1884 in the name of Aileen Campbell on investing in our credit unions, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The next question is that motion 1884 in the name of Aileen Campbell, as amended, on investing in our credit unions, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The next question is that Amendment 1885.1 in the name of Alexander Stewart, which seeks to amend motion 1885 in the name of Fiona Hislop on the impact of the UK Government's family migration policy on Scotland, be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We're not agreed. We'll move to a vote on this amendment, and members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on Amendment 18885.1 in the name of Alexander Stewart is yes 30, no 82. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that motion 18885 in the name of Fiona Hislop on the impact of the UK Government's family migration policy on Scotland be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. We'll move to division. Members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion 18885 in the name of Fiona Hislop is yes 84, no 29. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. And that concludes decision time. We're going to move shortly to members' business in the name of Claire Adamson on Macmillan Cancer Support's World Biggest Coffee Morning, if I could speak. But we'll just wait a few moments for members and the Minister to change seats.